Boom! All right, we're recording.
Boo! Scared you a little bit. Just a little bit of interlude for today's episode of Some Like the Hot Takes with Gavin and
Ooh, Andrea now, who is a ghost right
Shh, shh.
now?
That's who let the witch in? Hey,
Hey, hey, hey,
did you
hey!
why? Hey, ooh,
Hey! I'm
hey,
flying on my broom here!
hey, bada bing. I'm getting. You see, I'm from Jersey. The joke is I'm from Jersey. You see, the joke is I'm from Jersey and
Me, who was born in the Midwest.
born in the Midwest, now is living in middle of living in Pennsylvania.
Middle of nowhere? Middle of nowhere.
Wait, it's oh my god, it's like one of those like Universal monster movies. It's the Jersey Devil versus the Pennsylvania what's like a Pennsylvania I'm trying to think of like a what's like a Pennsylvania plunderer or whatever. The Pennsylvania
Sure. Pennsylvania Bell Ringers? I don't know.
the Pennsylvania just a Philly fan. Philly fan versus Jersey Devil. I think it works.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Sure,
Go
yeah.
go Birds. Woo.
Ooh, go birds.
Woo, go Birds.
Stay away from Philly.
All right, go Birds. Anyway, so with that stupid
Philly is a horror movie right now since Eagles won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it has been. Actually, before we get into today's episode, I think it's worth noting David Lynch, who passed away this year. Rest in peace, rest in power. Actually has a story. You've seen Eraserhead. Have you seen Eraserhead?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the story behind that is apparently when he was living in like Philly, it was like really, really bad back in the day. It was really bad.
Oh yeah.
And he used to have like horror. He used to talk about in interviews like what inspired Eraserhead was him sleeping at night with his wife in like his little apartment and just hearing the violence outside and just like the sound waves of that. So in case you're wondering, so whenever you see those like montages of like Rocky running up the staircase, just know that in the exact same time, David Lynch is making a movie about how Pennsylvania just terrified him.
Yeah.
Anyway, welcome to the second episode of our dumb podcast.
You want to hear kind of a real life Pennsylvania horror story?
Sure, I'm ready for that.
So Pennsylvania is known. One of the things, at least my area, is known for is steel stacks. And steel stacks is one of the largest producers of battleship material in World War II. Fun fact, if you were working and happened to fall into the molten metal, they would not retrieve your body and your body would literally be molted into the battleship.
Has it ever happened?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Like, if you fell into the metal, they wouldn't retrieve your body.
So you just like walking to the ship one day, it's like, oh, there's a little hand. Hi.
Yeah, I mean, you're melted beyond recognition, but yeah.
Well, this is really horrifying.
Wow.
Speaking of horror, wow. What's today's
We're
episode
so good
about?
at segues.
What's today's episode
A
about?
beginner's guide to horror.
All right, so let's talk horror movies. Andrea, why don't you tell me a little bit about your experience with horror movies?
I love horror movies. I have been to horror conventions. I've watched them all the time. When I first got into horror, I went a little bit too deep into the deep end.
And what was your first?
The first horror movie I ever saw, I was in 6th grade. I saw the first Conjuring movie. Scared the crap out of me. Never finished the movie. Until freshman year of high school, I actually finished the movie, and then the floodgates opened for me, and I became a horror fan ever since.
I mean, it's interesting. I know it's funny when you see like 6th grade, but like I feel like there's stories of like I know my dad has a story of one of his favorite horror movies was Cujo with like the dog.
Yeah, I hate that movie. The dog is possessed and he's in pain.
But like, isn't that the point? Aren't we the real monsters? I haven't seen it. I really do want to see it.
Don't.
I'll see it. No, I'm going to see it. No, out of pure curiosity, I'm going to see it.
I mean, it's a good movie, but
when you hear people like talk about horror movies, oftentimes like, come on, fellas, let's go stand on top of each other's shoulders, putting ourselves in a little trench coat and go inside and go watch Murder McMurder Pants. This time,
let's go watch a scary movie.
Let's go watch Scary Movie.
That's a real movie, a scary movie.
Yeah, let's. I was referring to Scary Movie with the Wayans brother. Yeah. Yeah, I was referring to the classic.
Yeah.
The real cinema, because only the best and brightest on this podcast.
Of course.
But my experience with horror is very different. The first exposure I remember having to horror movies is someone telling me about the movie The Shining, directed by Stanley Kubrick, telling me about it. And I heard the word The Shining. I thought, oh, that sounds like a really nice movie. I didn't watch it. This is when I was in 5th grade. I didn't like I didn't know. I knew. I mean, I heard of the name. Obviously, I've heard of the name.
Also,
right?
rest in power, Shelley Duvall.
Rest in power.
Yeah.
Okay. But really, just but I remember hearing it, like, wow, Shining, that looks really interesting. Probably a nice movie about someone who learns how to shine or whatever. Like, they shine as a person. And then no, and then I remember watching a YouTube. Okay, but like, can you imagine a fourth grader today going on his like TikTok, whatever, and be like, oh my god, Jack Nicholson edit, like him in 5 Easy Pieces just like slamming on the table, like the
Next
freaking
to the Subway Surfers.
It's like Billie Eilish plays, like just like like Jack Nicholson going, you can't handle the truth, birds of the feather, we can stick together. Yeah, just something stupid like that. Yes. But point is, I remember just like looking at that, like a YouTube video about it afterwards. I was like, oh, I don't like this. And I just kind of turned my brain off from horror from that point on. Because I was like, I don't like horror. It's like, I just don't like it because all I thought horror movies was I'd go, huh, and then that would be it. Like, it was just people jumping you. And that was all horror movies were. And we're going to get into it later today. But there was one movie I watched when I was actually younger than when I came to that discovery, that I watched again, that made me change my perception of horror movies. And then I watched a couple more that were more, I actually feel like I gave myself a good introduction to like horror movies. Okay. And I felt like that led to my appreciation of the genre. So Andrea, what do you like about horror movies? What eventually led to this fascination? What do you get from them?
So Conjuring isn't the best example of it, but that is where I started in horror. It opened the iceberg, as you will. That's not a phrase. But it opened the door that led me down the horror iceberg.
Wait, but the Titanic would be really happy if someone just opened that iceberg. It's like, oh yeah, you passed straight through.
Yeah, Leonardo DiCaprio would have survived. Oh no, the poor under 21-year-olds.
Oh no, the door.
I'm so sorry.
Man, you sure hope he floated on that door, don't you? We're keeping that in. No, we're keeping that in. I don't care.
Anyways. It's kind of a poor example of it, but what I love about horror is it kind of holds the mirror up to society. Horror is one of those genres that it forces you to ask yourself some really tough questions. Here's a famous example. Saw. You want to play a game? Ask yourself, like, what would you do in a life or death situation for survival? Like, would you actually mutilate yourself? I'm talking about for reference for horror fans in the audience, I'm talking about the early Saw films, not the later ones, the early ones. It really holds the mirror. And then like with The Substance, kind of a hotbed topic right now, it uses kind of this like art house mix of bloody horror or body horror to really kind of call out feminine sexualization in film and in the media, and how Demi Moore is gorgeous. I'm sorry, she's so pretty. She's 62 and looks stunning in that film.
Oh, that's Demi Moore, man.
That's Demi Moore. She looks stunning. Margot Quall's 32, also looks stunning. And they're like, oh,
Dennis Quaid. Dennis Quaid does not.
Does not, because they use the wide angle lens, and of course it's going to distort. Anyways, what
do you vote for? Oh wait.
Oh wait.
Oh wait.
Oh no, but like it holds mirror up to like impossible body standards.
Right.
And then also like, I mean, there's always like with horror, there's always like the weird outliers.
Right.
Sometimes horror is a genre that is
very tough to pin.
It's very tough to pin. Unfortunately, some of the roots in horror is based in snuff and exploitation films, which absolutely isn't acceptable.
But there is a lot of people who do appreciate that kind of thing, and people who I do respect the opinion of. But I do think it is a slippery slope.
It is. I feel like the Terrifier series is a great example of really kind of bordering that. But I also love like horror, kind of like musicals in our last episode. Horror really pushes the boundaries of what is possible in filmmaking. I mean, consider the first horror movie ever made is The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And it was the first ever film to use matte paintings. It was considered the first ever film to have a plot twist as well. And it's really like, by modern standards, it's not that scary. It's really not. But it's still like, it pushes you to imagine like, what if everything you are seeing is a lie? Like, what if you're being manipulated to see things in a different light, but no one will believe you otherwise? Kind of like the Truman Show, which I think it drew a lot of inspiration from that.
Right.
I mean, there's other aspects I love. I love gore. I'm a gore fiend. I find it entertaining. I do FX makeup on sets. I love like watching that. And I'm like, how did they do that? And that's also why I love the early Saw, because like it was all practical. All of those sets or all those traps could actually work in real life.
Right.
But the later ones, when they use digital, they're not as good.
Right.
So I'm a little bit of a gore fiend too. But what do you like about horror? What is drawn to you in horror?
So I mentioned Cannibal Holocaust earlier. I'm gonna say I haven't seen it because I just don't really want to.
I didn't. I haven't seen it.
You've seen it?
No. I've seen parts of it.
No, I know.
I'm not gonna watch them actually kill a turtle.
No, I don't want to do that. No, I don't find that comfortable.
But the premise of it is interesting.
Right. Like, here's the thing. If you want to watch that, that's your prerogative, right? Like, whatever. Point is, but that's kind of the thing. When I think of horror movies, sometimes I think of like that. That's when I originally think of it. But something I've taken from it is I don't really think of. I definitely agree with you, the idea that it very much is a inherently political genre.
Absolutely.
Socially, I feel like unlike most, I'd argue comedy and horror are very interesting because they ask a certain question. What does society find funny and what does society find scary? Those are the questions that oftentimes those movies, like horror movies, have. But it's that combined with, to me, what I appreciate, which is the history of horror movies.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because here's the thing. There are certain conventions. Like, inherently, horror movies are kind of campy. They're kind of more underground. Like, I know we have a whole point where it's like, horror movies, we kind of say, like, oh, they aren't being appreciated by the Oscars. And I definitely agree with that. And they should be. But a small part of me kind of likes the idea that horror movies are like something that a lot of people, it's the people's people, like people who really aren't into movies watch all these Saw movies. They watch Nightmare on Elm Street, whatever.
Yeah, that's why I feel like horror is the indie people's genre. Like there's so many people in film school like us make a lot of horror movies.
Because oftentimes the movies that affected us the most when we're younger are these movies that terrify you.
Because I saw Blair. I saw Blair Witch way too young.
When, what age?
I think also around like 5th or 6th grade.
Oh no, that would mess me up.
Oh yeah, I was staring in the corner of my room, terrified.
Oh, that'd be bad.
But then it's like when my kind of horror rankings. I was in the Conjuring for a while. Then like I kind of went off the deep end, thinking, well, to be a true horror fan, I gotta sit through all of it. So I watched The Human Centipede. Ugh.
Yeah, so if there's any other message that we can give to this episode,
you don't have to go off the deep end in the horror iceberg to be a horror fan.
Like I mentioned Sallow, whatever, Pasolini. I mean, I want to see more of Pasolini's work.
Yeah.
But
it's a joke in the horror community.
Yeah.
But
and I do like other Pasolini movies. I want to like other ones. Like I hear a lot of like Decremon. I really want to see whatever. But point is, horror movies, oftentimes we look at them as, at least when people who are younger, oftentimes the thing is, what's the scariest one? Like, what's the one that's
That's what I did. It's like,
you don't have to do that.
I will say, in defense of Human Centipede, I'm sure a lot of people know the premise, or if they don't know the premise, can figure it out. It is a Holocaust allegory.
Right.
Because Dr. Mengele is the main villain's name in that film, and is also a real-life Nazi scientist.
Right. Let's also keep in mind this podcast is about introductory horror movies, and we're starting with the worst possible.
But like, these are good horror. Not Cannibal Holocaust. Like some of like the more. I mean, some people consider the Substance extreme horror, because of how graphic it was. I don't think it was that graphic, but hey, I've been around the block.
But okay, so let's really get.
So what should you start with, actually?
Right, what should you start with? For me, I guess what a good horror movie introduction would have to be is a movie that it does have suspense. And here's the thing, for sake of argument, I'm going to get rid of a couple of obvious examples.
Okay.
I'm not going to do Hitchcock, and we can have a whole episode about Hitchcock, because we can spend a whole episode on that goldmine, right? I'm just talking about Hitch. But suspense, that whole suspense element's got to be there. And it's got to teach, I think, to a lot of people that horror movies are more than just jump scares. It's got to show...
My favorite horror movies don't have jump scares.
Right. Some of mine do, but the thing is, they're not all it is. Oftentimes, the most horrifying elements are there, but there's another part of it which really comes down to there's got to be more than just the horror. As we're going to talk about, for me, I oftentimes think the best horror movies to start out with, especially for people who are younger, are horror comedies. and especially the best of them, the really great ones, are able to combine horror and comedy, two very purposely provocative genres, in such interesting ways that like they are able to like really like they're able to work and mesh. And so you could be like, oh, it's so funny, but then could also give you this. Like it shows you that horror as a genre is a lot more than that. And I have
versatile.
Right, and I have other examples, but that's
what hey, Gavin, what's an example of a horror comedy?
Jeez, that's a brilliant question. I have 3 I'll mention rapid fire. Earliest, this is very much early, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which I say that title, and Andrea's already laughing, like, already panic in the aisles. Like, everyone's like, oh, But here's the thing, genuinely it works, because it's a universal horror monster movie, right? Which is like Dracula, Frankenstein, all these people, mixed with Abbott and Costello, 2 vaudeville comedians. You know, that's where Who's on First was popularized by those guys. So, but here's what's brilliant about it. The movie works really well, because you allow those 2 guys to be funny all the time. Like they're like, hey Abbott, I can't move over here. It's like, come on, Costello, what are you doing? They're just like stupid, dumb nonsense. But they don't joke around about the monsters. The monsters are still allowed to be scary, because they're allowed to be like, you know, they take the horror seriously. But in the center, the whole joke works, because there's a scene where like they're in a castle-y looking environment, and he's like, why don't you go downstairs? And Costello's like, I don't want to go, right? So he goes downstairs, there's like a trap door, he ends up in a secret room where he's being chased by a monster follows him, right? And still the comedy and Costello like doing the crazy facial expression, but still the monster's still moving. Like it has still the tensity of like, oh, I wonder if he's gonna get out of it. Like suspense and comedic suspense are very similar, and the movie proves that. That's that one. Next example, Gremlins. Gremlins is, she's already laughing in the aisles. Gremlins is
it's a great movie.
No, a near perfect movie. And it's one of my favorite 80s movies, honestly, because of what it does. It's speaking to that satirical element. The movie is an allegory for consumerism.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the movie, it starts out, you know, the whole idea is you're advertised one thing of things you can't do, and the things get popularized, and it kills a whole town on Christmas. That's the whole point of the movie. And what it really works about it is able to be a very like gory, like the whole joy you get out of this movie, the gleeful fun of it, comes from these gremlins just
they shove water in a blender.
No, the blender is great. The one I watched it recently with my little cousin, and then like the part that had me and my little cousin dying. There's a part where like they enter like a grandma's house, and she's like, "Oh no, the gremlins!" So she gets in a little chair like to go up the stairs, and they like hijack the whole system, and she flies out the window.
Yeah.
And the funniest scene is there's a guy in a car, and he puts on the headlight, and you just see in the snow the chair with the 2 little legs just like. And it's the most hilarious visual, and it works really well as an allegory because you just really enjoy the jokes involved. It's just a really clever movie. And then my last example for this is a movie called An American Werewolf in London.
Have not seen that one.
Which it's a funny movie. So the premise is really good. It's 1981. Movie starts, Riff and Dunn and another guy. They're walking down, like they're on a hike, right? They're in London. Right? You guess where it is, London. They're in London. Where they're walking around, and it starts out as buddy comedy, like joking around, you know, whatever. They go into a bar, right? And they're told of like a myth, like beware of the wolf or whatever, right? They're like, whatever. So it starts out a funny comedy, like, ho, ho, ho. Wolf attacks them, right? Wolf attacks them. One of them wakes up in a hospital. Other one dies, right? Tone immediately shifts, right? Now it's a horror movie. Other guy, the spirit comes back and is like, hey, bro, I died. You should also die. Why should I do that? Because you're going to do some really terrible things in a little while. And so he eventually is like, oh, that's weird. I have visions of my friend, whatever. Movie goes on, is a romance. And honestly, the romance is like, whatever. Like, I don't really care about it. It's like, whatever. I mean, there's some jokes in the movie that don't age well, but like, whatever. But it's worth it for these scenes because there's dream sequences that are amazing. But then there's the moment where it shifts and it becomes a body horror because you see him using Rick Baker's amazing practical effects turn into the werewolf. And there's a scene, like, by the way, fun fact, every song in the movie uses the word moon in some way, which is a dumb detail.
The filmmakers are paying attention.
Right, but point is, I think the scene that epitomizes this movie is there's a scene in which he's reading a book and he just It's like a nice, like calm, like music. Like I forget the song, but it's like I don't know why I love you. Like a really nice like love song playing. And then he goes, "It's happening again!" And in brutal detail, you just see him transform as the fun music is still playing.
Ooh,
like it purposely
nice.
contrasts these details, and you're left like, I wonder what's going to happen because the comedy scenes are separate from the scenes where he commits the murder. And then as the movie goes on, you're like, oh, he's killing a lot of people as the werewolf. He doesn't even know it. So you actually get a chance to like a front row seat to the horror.
Nice.
But that would be my comedy horrors. And I have a couple more, but I want to pass it over to you.
Yeah.
What do you think are some really good ones?
I'm going to add on, before I get into my horror for beginners, I wouldn't necessarily say this is a beginner film. I mean, anyone can watch it. But it works better when you have a great appreciation for horror, and that is Tucker and Dale versus Evil. Have you seen it?
You've told me about it.
I've told you haven't seen it. It's basically, it is all of the 70s, 80s Michael Myers slasher teenagers in the woods trope. But it's these two hillbillies who get mistaken for slasher killers by the teenagers. It's all entirely from the hillbillies' perspective, but they don't know that the kids think that they're slashers. So a bunch of Gremlin-esque gory antics ensue. It is so fun. There's not really a lot of suspense, but it's so funny. It's even more funny when like it's funny regardless, but when you can point out all the individual horror tropes and like all the things that inspired this film, it is one of my favorite movies. I love that movie so much. But a lot of at least one of the movies I'm gonna mention, Tucker and Dale directly steals a shot from this film. And this is gonna be kind of controversial because a lot of people wouldn't consider this a beginner horror movie. But I'm going to say the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
That's a movie. That's a real one right there.
That's a real one. So I'm throwing you a little bit in the deep end here by recommending.
Like this one's, guys, this one's really good. I'm telling you.
It's really good.
Heard of it? You don't know what you don't know, man. Go ahead.
And also, everyone assumes Texas Chainsaw is like really, really gory. The first one is not. The first one is very restrained, and you do not see a lot of the gore. Because one of the things I love when horror movies do is the mind and the imagination is your own worst enemy when you're watching a horror movie.
Right.
Because a great horror filmmaker knows that your imagination can do infinitely more than what they can on the screen. That's why horror novels are so effective.
Right.
But everyone kind of knows like this group of teenagers in Texas, like they go, like their van breaks down, they're stopping at this house, and then Leatherface comes in like with a chainsaw and like drags her into the house, and like everyone has seen that shot. Everyone knows the van shot. That's been stolen in Tucker and Dale. It's been used in X. It's been used in a lot of horror films. Why I decided to start with this one is, like we said earlier, it forces you to imagine, what would I do? Like, and also it forces you to imagine that. And the way it uses that psychological aspect, like I said, you don't see any of the gore, but you see the meat hook hanging in the corner of the room, and you're like,
and that draws your eye.
And you're like, oh, no. I remember the first time sitting there, like, no. And you know someone's gonna get put on that meat hook, but you don't know how, why, or when, or who.
Right.
And also, Texas Chainsaw Massacre also is the first film to have the final girl trope, which is one of my favorite like tropes in horror, is the final girl. But it works super well. It's very restrained, but it's also so unnerving. It's so like, it's not icky. It doesn't make you feel dirty like some horror movies do. Like there are some horror movies I've seen where it's like, I need to take a shower.
Right.
But this one, like, and also like, it has a somewhat happy ending, somewhat.
Or somewhat. But still keeps you in suspense.
It keeps the suspense going, and it doesn't let up.
Yeah, not to spoil anything. I don't want to like.
Yeah, I'm not going to spoil anything.
Out of any of these movies we're probably going to mention, this is the one I think if you actually want to get into horror.
Because that's the thing. If you want to start getting into serious, like more hardcore, I'm doing air quotes right now. Hardcore horror. That's where to start, because I feel like some people just, horror's not their thing. They don't want to be scared. They don't want to have to try to imagine that stuff, and that's perfectly fine. That's all right. Like that, my dad is one of those people. So.
Yeah, but I'll tell you really quick, because you mentioned it earlier. For some of our listeners who maybe aren't familiar with horror, what is the final girl trope?
Final girl trope is basically it kind of goes with that teenager in the woods. it's the last girl who's like the smartest out of all the characters, like is the last girl to survive.
So I'm gonna mention a couple more, but I really quick want to stress that when it comes to horror movies, something that came to my mind is just the idea that a lot of horror, especially, I think there's a sort of societal pressure. Like, you don't gotta watch everything if you don't want to, right? No, like, you don't have to. Like, if there's a horror movie that seems extreme to you that someone else enjoys, like, that's their business, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If it was what they like, but you don't gotta, like, you know, it's like, it's the same thing with comedy, where there's a lot of comedy I like, but if you find a like a comedic film, like, kind of, like, you know, pushes the boundaries for you, there's nothing wrong with that. I think we're all allowed to, like, enjoy different things.
Yeah.
Or blah, 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 kumbaya, whatever, right?
Yeah. Because I know, like, I mentioned Terrifier earlier. I feel like Terrifier is a perfect example of this because there's no real plot to Terrifier, this entire series, at all. There's not really a plot. But it's known for its excessive gore. And that's why I say, like, Terrifier is a huge name in horror right now. The third one just came out. Right. Don't feel pressured to watch it. Like, that's one thing I kind of hate about the horror fandom, is there's kind of a peer pressure in the horror fandom, only rivaled maybe by the Star Wars fandom, where where it's kind of like this pressure of, like, you have to like this film or you have to, like, watch this film. You don't.
Otherwise, you're weak and you're dumb.
Oh, that's so. I've had people say
you're smelly.
That's what people said to me when I was first getting into, like, more, like, really into horror.
Yeah, because when I was starting out in horror and I watched Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, I was so scared.
Yeah, where people had me tell me to watch Megan is Missing. Don't.
Well,
I bring it up because it was a TikTok trend back in the 20-COVID era.
I had a friend who was like, I just watched the craziest movie. I got to tell you all about it. And I was just like, that was one of the first horror movies I was like, I don't like this. I really don't
I'm not even going to get into that rabbit hole with that one. Many of other YouTubers have explained that film more intelligently than I could. Dad gets so triggered and heated with that film. A film... Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you go ahead.
I was another beginner that may not seem like beginner, but I will say, my friend who hates horror movies, she sat down and watched this film and is now more chill with horror movies. Hereditary.
Tell me a little bit.
Yes, it has the knower of, like, one of the scariest horror movies ever made. It's not gory. There's a little bit of gore. Like, it's not excessively gory. And it has one of the most infamous scenes in all of horror, which I cannot say without spoiling it. And it is really good at the psychological aspect of horror because it throws you into this family in absolute turmoil. And it's like that desperation of what would you do if you could talk to your kid again? Like, what would you do to save your family? And it's that pure desperation that so many people, and, like, familial trauma, unfortunately, is not very uncommon. So it's something that so many people can root themselves in. And Ari Aster is just an incredible filmmaker where there's so much detail, where I actually had to go back and read the screenplay to fully get what was going on. But it's such a good movie in the way that it's so restrained, but yet also holds nothing back.
Its themes and what it's talking about.
But that's why I bring this up, because this film and Pearl, another A24 horror movie, I feel like are perfect examples of the way horror has a unique disposition for the way it portrays its themes. Because it can push its themes to the logical extreme, which comedy can do the same, but not a lot of other genres can say they can do that.
Right, and I totally agree. But when we look at someone like Ari Aster, one of his favorite films in terms of psychological thrillers, which I would say in terms of what we're talking about, I mean, we have the horror comedies, which I think anyone can get into.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would put Texas Chainsaw and Hereditary as those are the breaking points. I think if you want to get into, like, some of the quote unquote serious stuff, probably break through those.
Check those, and if those really start kind of triggering you, don't push yourself.
Yeah, you don't have to. But you don't have to. Yeah, but I would say a good middle ground between those two. One of my favorite horror movies, there were two horror movies that I watched that made me think, okay, I love horror movies now. And both of which I got from the local library. And these movies are Psycho
Oh, okay.
Psycho, which, Psycho, Hitchcock,
Yeah.
But I'll say really quick about Psycho. That movie, everyone knows the scene with like the shower, right? It's not a spoiler at this point.
Bates Motel.
There's another slight jump scare in this. It's not a normal jump scare, but it plays with your expectations in a way. I didn't know it was coming. I went, huh, this is a film from 1960. That's impressive.
Yeah.
Really fun. I like Psycho. But the one I really want to talk about is Rosemary's Baby. That's the one. If there's a movie...
We're talking exclusively about the film, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, all right. Future episode, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I pitched that.
Followed by Lolita.
I pitched that as a joke to Andrea. Like, what if we do the director of Rosemary's Baby as a joke, and then you like were really serious with it? And I'm like, God, all right. So let's deal with that another day. Point is, Rosemary's Baby is such an amazing movie, guys. You don't even know the half of it. Like, this movie is about a woman and a woman played by Mia Farrow and her husband played by the great John Cassavetes, and they move into an apartment in New York, and they move, and suddenly Mia Farrow suspects the people around her want to use her baby as the new son of Satan. Normal stuff, right? Yeah. So it has a dream. The movie puts you in a place because it's not really like a jump scare movie, but it has that Hitchcock intensity. But there's so much, like, it puts you in an odd spot because for a while it's less so a conventional horror movie and more like a thriller, more like a Hitchcock thriller, because half the time you're in her position, where half the time you're like, I wonder what's going on, where are you going, because you're the blind man.
It's such a subjective, it's a subjective camera, unreliable narrator,
right? Because that's the real wonder of the movie. It's like, do you trust her? Is she going crazy, or is she actually right about this? I'm not going to spoil how, but this movie has so much implied horror, which I think is the big ringer here.
That's when horror would be at its peak.
Implied horror, I'd argue, is the idea that without showing something, but rather implying, you can make so much with it. And that can be kind of seen in Texas Chainsaw with the meat hook.
There's other examples of that as well.
Rosemary's Baby probably is the masterclass of that. That scene at the end is one of my favorite scenes in any movie, because of just how it shakes you just by one line, and how that letting the audience fill in their own interpretation of what that thing would look like is so like it places the horror on you and your perception of what you find scary, and it's super haunting. It's really great. I think Rosemary's Baby is an incredible little movie. I think more people should see. And on top of that, okay, so this is moving kind of in this middle ground still, right? Between Texas Chainsaws and your Hereditaries, and between your American Werewolves and Gremlins, you find the Italian Giallo. So do you know what an Italian Giallo is?
No.
So a Giallo, I struggle to really come up with a firm description, but it's basically like an Italian murder mystery horror. That's kind of the idea. Basically, a lot of filmmakers are inspired by it. There's a lot of inspiration, but arguably the most famous, like, for example, if any of you guys have seen Edgar Wright's Last Night at Soho, that's a movie that's very much inspired by Giallos. But arguably the most famous filmmaker in this genre is a man by the name of Dario Argento.
Him I've heard of.
Dario Argento, his most famous movie is called Suspiria. It's a slasher movie, right? Which as a term we have not brought up yet. Slasher.
Yeah.
Which
that's a tangent.
Right.
Slight type. I don't like slashers. A lot of people love slashers. I'm here for it. They over rely on jump scares, and in filmmaking, your brain builds up the tension. Jump scares gives your brain that kick. It's like, oh, we're good. It's a cop-out.
But I do think, though, when we come to slashers, I think that's kind of a lot of the placement.
I mean, the newer slashers, like OG, like with the original.
Psycho. In fact, Psycho's technically a slasher.
Absolutely. But it's been watered down. And that's not something I'll talk about when you're done with Suspiria, is how I feel like modern horror has been so watered down. But anyway.
Oh, yeah, sure. So Suspiria is a movie that by and large is a freaky movie, because
Robert Eggers freaky, or a different kind of freaky?
Different. We're not that freaky.
Okay, different freak. Okay, got it.
Different. Well, freaky in the sense that you're like, what's going on?
Okay.
The movie.
Thank you for defining.
Thank you. Define your term. Socratic method. Like, whatever. So basically, like, the movie is about basically it's set in a dance hall, like a ballerina, but it's ballerinas, right? The dancers and the ballet. And the movie starts. Woman goes. I believe it's Jessica Harper. I might be wrong. I think it's Jessica Harper's the lead, and she goes in and she sees a murder, and it's the colors bright red. They're almost like Wes Anderson-y in the way that they use color, because it's these bright, vibrant. Just a room is just red. A room is blue with like a room could be shot in red. All the walls are red, and the light is this dark blue. Like it defines primaries.
Rest in peace, your sensors, but. Rest in peace, the camera sensors for that scene. But
yeah, rest in peace that. But the whole movie is just playing with film that way. But it's the way it puts you in a position in which the kills are weird. They're fascinating. Ooh. Oftentimes in horror, it's the exact opposite of Rosemary's Baby, because Rosemary's Baby puts you in a position where it's like, who do I believe? This movie implies, okay, you're gonna believe anything I tell you. This thing can happen. We're gonna throw this at these characters. Like, it puts you in a dreamlike state where any horror in it is more like, whoa, what's going on? The soundtrack is by a band called Goblin, and it's like the craziest freaking like prog, like it's just the strangest music. It's really great. But really quick side tangent before I get to your point. He made a movie afterwards, which I don't recommend you see before Suspiria. But if you like that movie, please watch the movie Inferno, because that has probably my favorite kill in any horror movie. Can I tell? Okay, spoilers for Inferno, by the way. Big spoilers. Don't watch, skip this little part of the video until you probably watch it, or if you don't care, whatever. My favorite kill in any horror movie, and I think this will be actually, you know what? I'm going to hold on to this.
Okay.
I want to ask that at the end for fun. Your favorite kill, and I'll say mine.
Okay.
But
I was gonna say with the water down, Rosemary's Baby reminded me of a film. There are two films that came out in recent years, Immaculate and First Omen. Both of which,
seen any of those.
They were both a religious horror movie about a nun who has an immaculate conception of the devil's child. They came out in the same year, by the way.
Normal stuff.
So, slight tangent. Why is it okay to make horror out of people's actual faith?
That's a good question.
I get it. A lot of people have issues with.
Now, hold on. Are we saying the filmmakers aren't a part of this faith?
I'm not sure, actually.
Because let's say a Catholic filmmaker wants to make a movie about their own Catholic guilt represented.
Then absolutely.
That's personal expression. I mean, it's that same.
But it's become there is a genre of religious horror now, and all of them circle around Christianity, which I think is interesting. But that's a slight side. That's a light. It's just like, why is it okay to?
But that's the thing. I think that's a question that's worth asking, and a question that I think is interesting to wrestle with. I'm not afraid to wrestle with it. You know
it's an interesting, but it's one of those. It is the idea of like someone having the devil's child is very much like a trope that has been watered down, and like the people lost in the woods. That's an age-old trope, because like every time you go camp, I grew up going camping. Every time you go camping, there's a little bit of that fear of, okay, what if I get attacked by a bear? Or what if there is someone in the woods when I'm hiking? But no one. Sorry, go ahead.
I think worth noting about Rosemary's Baby before I get to your greater point is I do think Rosemary's Baby is reactionary. Because
absolutely.
It's based on a book, because around the same time in the late 60s, there was issues about cult leaders.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And speaking of cult leaders, the director's wife was a woman by the name of Sharon Tate, who was murdered by the Mansons. So this whole idea of the fear of cults,
it's absolutely
inspired the movie.
And I can understand why there is again a rise in kind of like religious horror. I get that, with like the current administration and all that. But the thing is, like, the idea of birthing the devil's child is a lot more primal than the woods.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing about horror is horror. We touched on this earlier. Horror has been the indie filmmaker's playground.
Right.
And that's what I got started in The Conjuring. That was mine for the horror. Conjuring's still near and dear to me, but I'm sure any of you listening who are horror fans are just going, ooh. Because The Conjuring's like the MCU of the horror franchise. So it's this big budget, hugely monetized, based on true events, quotation marks, so true, the original people actually sued the movie because it was so inaccurate. And that's the thing with horror is interesting, because I guess it holds the mirror up to society, but it really pushes the boundary and forces filmmakers to question, like, how far can they push films.
Right.
There's no point I was gonna make.
Yeah.
But I completely slipped my mind.
You were going to talk about shoot, what a great podcast you're running here. What a classy operation.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going to ask, like, I actually want to ask you really quick, like, if you think, and this is, maybe we through this discussion, we can kind of get back to that greater point.
Oh, I remembered it. Anyways, continue.
There you go. Never mind.
When you talked about the idea with also Rosemary's Baby with the like unreliable narrator and you're really not quite sure what's going on. Understated little movie, The Babadook. So simply made. It is so simple. Just a little childhood storybook. But yeah, it is one of the, because it really focuses on what can the mind conceive. That's why I love psychological thrillers, because like they really kind of test you, where slashers you're like, turn on the stupid car, and like, you see what I mean?
Yeah.
But also, like, one thing I love that I do kind of want to touch on, because I don't think anyone else has said this. There can be horror outside of horror. Let me explain what I mean. Like,
dramas could be horrifying.
Like Chernobyl. It is not technically a horror series, but that miniseries made my skin crawl more than any horror movie I ever watched could. Right.
Do you ever see the movie Dr. Strangelove? That's a comedy. That is a Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove. So that's a horror. That's not a horror movie. It's a comedy war movie about the end of the world. That is one of the few comedies that's like, you're terrified for the human race by the end of it.
Yeah, that's how Chernobyl is, because it's like,
right, yeah,
you're terrified because like everyone knows what Chernobyl is, but like it's the idea like the government's doing literally nothing, and it's so understated, especially like in the first episode when you know like all these people are in danger, but all you really see is the guy's face like half red after opening the door to the core. Like, it is so understated, and that's like why I think Rosemary's Baby works so well, and why psychological horror, and that's why the original Texas Chainsaw works so well. It is something kind of grand, like Nuclear Wasteland, or like Cannibals Living in Texas, like kind of like this grand idea that seems so like spectacular.
Right.
But then the great horror directors can take something so spectacular and put it into basically a jar, and you seal all of like, you basically put the audience in that jar and shut the lid.
But then again, the opposite could be true. A filmmaker can take such a simple idea and make it horrifying. Case in point, I think a movie like Get Out is a starter. Like, because I mean, I'm not going to be one and say that the concept of racism isn't already horrifying, especially in America, but it puts you in a place where you imply more things about it. It doesn't just take something you know and it puts it in a capsule in which you can consume it. It brings you an idea, and Jordan Peele, using his mastery of visual storytelling, is able to tell you so much more within the frame and so much more with his dialogue, which I think is this really great attribute of just like, he's bringing you issues that you haven't even considered. Like, it just like, it puts you in a position where you take an issue that you think you know and just blowing that up in an even greater way. And I think filmmakers, really great horror filmmakers, can do both on the fly.
You can do both.
Right.
So any other, I pretty much said my piece for horror.
Right. I just wanted to say, just for really fun, what is your favorite kill in a horror movie? Because I got mine. I want to see.
Like I said, I have a guilty pleasure of, I like watching gory movies. I've seen a lot of the Saw movies, and they got some great kills. Oh, answer yours first. I need time to contemplate this one.
Okay, I'll go first while you figure yours out. So, a little film also by Dario Argento is a movie called Inferno. No context. Okay, spoilers, by the way, for whatever. At this point, shut it off, because Andre's also gonna like spoil a movie probably. So, Inferno. The point of the scene. There's a little guy. He's like, I think he's in crutches, but he's going to the pond or whatever. He's gonna drown some cats. Completely unrelated to anything that's going on. Whatever. Like, not important. He's gonna put some cats in a bag in the water, right? You know, because he's evil. Right? I'm gonna put him in, and as he puts it in, a bunch of freaking rats show up, and they just like, first of all, he falls in the water, right? Because like a goof, he falls in the water. Rats come in. They start like gnawing on him, like a bunch of rats, because a bunch of rats start like eating him. He's like, ow, help. He's like, ow, rats are eating me. Far off in the distance, there's a butcher, and he runs to his help. Right? He's already being eaten by rats, so it's already great. Butcher runs up, like, oh my god, I gotta help this guy. He runs over, and right before he's about to do anything, he's holding a knife. Mind you, he's still holding the knife, right? Suddenly gets possessed by a witch's spell, kills him with the knife. He's like, oh, thank God for your help. Like, just like, it's so dumb, but it works so well. Because that's a movie. Inferno is like, what if Suspiria, any sort of logic in Suspiria, or at least like Suspiria, you can appreciate it as like your mind is like, whoa, what's going on?
Whoa,
Inferno is like, what? We lost the plot. I love basically, if you like Suspiria, Inferno is the ultimate test of just like what the hell is even going on? Like, it's crazy.
Oh, we never even talked about found footage films.
Oh no.
We never even. I mentioned Blair Witch.
Yeah. Okay. I think Blair Witch. That's the one. If you're gonna start with one,
it started. No, it did not start it. Blair Witch was the second film to do it.
But that's the one to start with if you're getting into it.
That movie makes me so motion sick.
Yeah. Okay.
So stop talking about the map. Sorry.
Okay. Well. We'll put Blair Witch with the Texas and Hereditary. If that's what you want to get into. Blair is the test. If you can get to the Blair.
If you can get because it is all. And I have a conspiracy theory about that movie, which I will tell you, Gavin, about at the end of this podcast.
And you know what? Maybe if we do a Blair Witch episode where we talk about this and the sequel.
No!
Let's do it. No, another episode.
Anyway,
come on.
Okay.
Come on. All right. What's your kill? Before
can I say two?
Sure.
Okay. So I have best kill effect-wise and gore-wise, because, you know, me, gore fiend. And just overall best kill emotionally, like where I was just sitting there like...
special. She's giving the real awards here.
Just like, yes. The Andrea award. Anyways, so best gore kill. I'm gonna say Saw X, Valentina's death.
Okay.
It's one of the Saw traps. She basically, I forget what type of, it's a saw, ha ha ha. It's I forget the type. It's basically like a wire. Like you have like two. Geely saw, I think is what it's called.
That's freaky. No.
Yeah, she has to saw her own leg off at the thigh with a Geely saw.
Oh.
It was all done practically. That scene took them 3 days to film. Her sawing her, and you see it all in gory detail.
Well.
And that actress, she's screaming her head off, but also not annoyingly screaming her head off. And she's going for it. Like, you go. Spoilers, doesn't make it. Doesn't quite. Because they also make her get bone marrow out of her, out of the little socket she has. And it's like, okay, that was a little much.
I hope you're not eating while watching this episode, by the way.
Is it weird? I can eat and sit through an episode of The Walking Dead, no problem.
Oh, well, let's hope our audience has the same level.
I sat there eating my pancakes and eggs during an episode of The Walking Dead.
No, I thought you were like, I was watching the Saw movie where they had to extract bone marrow as I was eating a turkey leg on the bone. I'm just like, eating rib bones. Like,
I was eating popcorn in the movie theater.
Or just, you have a turkey leg, you're eating the bone.
So yeah, that's that one. With trying to eat the bone marrow was a little much, but just effect-wise, the fact that it took them 3 days to do that. They used a real saw on a prosthetic leg. You cannot even tell where the prosthetic begins and ends.
Right.
In terms of heavy spoilers for Nosferatu, if you have not seen it, heavy spoilers.
Heavy spoilers. Go see it. It's pretty good. I like it.
Ellen's death in Nosferatu, I think, is one of my favorite kills in a horror movie. Thematically, the way it's intercut with her husband trying to get back to her. It's like just this emotional peak of the film. And then just that final shot of just her out on the bed. Also, I like that they have her go for him go for the heart, not the neck. OG vampire lore. And this is that final shot of Ellen on the bed with Desperatu's saggy everything just over. And it's just that high shot overlooking the bed with her husband in the corner, Willem Dafoe stealing the cat. Just that shot.
Well, I saw it at a theater. Me and my friend were like, what is going on?
I know, it's a shot, I think, that sticks with you.
It does. It really does.
It's it's the final shot of the film. It's just that final death shot or death graphic. James A. Denise, shout out to James A. Denise, love him. But just that sticks with me. The Nosferatu is my favorite horror movie, flat out.
Wow. The original of the Eggers.
I'm gonna say Edgar's because I like the way I like the changes he made to the original. But we'll talk about some there. OG vampires, Bram Stoker. That's my niche. There is an Astarion stand in the corner of my room right now. But just that final shot that sticks with you, and you're just like, oh.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty much our piece on horror. What's the moral of this story? This moral of this episode?
Moral story. Horror, despite its tainted history, deserves a lot more recognition for the work
and more respect at the Oscars.
And a lot more for the effort that filmmakers put in. If you haven't seen The Substance and Nosferatu, go watch them. They're great. Last little tidbit I'll give, if you want to get into horror, there's no shame. If you go on IMDb, type in whatever movie you want to type in Parents Guide, it'll give you a spoiler-free list of all the gore to watch out for and stuff.
Right.
I still do that if I don't know what I'm getting myself into. So if you really want to check, you can do that.
Also, before we end this episode and tell you what's coming up next, I want to bring up a brief side story about Psycho. I went to a local library to take out Psycho. Mm-hmm. I swear to God, I was 16. I took out Psycho. It was technically rated R, and they said, we cannot give this to you.
You have to be 17.
What?
You have to be 17.
But like, should it be? Like, it's 1960. They
didn't have PG-13 till Indiana Jones Temple of Doom.
No, but like, here's the thing. It brings up an interesting question. Do you think movies' ratings should change over time?
Yes, I have.
But here's the thing. Psycho has not, but I think it should. Because, like, I hate to be that guy and be like, oh, kids are exposed to worse, but it really is. Like, more people should watch Psycho, right?
It's just like, the Hays Code was like kind of going out of effect. People weren't really sure.
Hays Codes are like evaporating around that time.
Yeah.
But it's still there.
I am a proprietor of. We need a PG-16 rating because there's PG-13 movies. Like Forrest Gump, it's a PG-13 movie, but like there's still a lot of nudity and just a lot of stuff that would go over kids' heads. So, like that could maybe be a PG-16 movie, where like there's other like Indiana Jones Temple of Doom is PG-13. That could stay PG-13. Jaws, I think, is that PG or PG-13?
PG.
That could like move up to PG-13. But then there's other like PG-13, like Marvel those are PG-13. They can stay PG-13. But
because they do F-bombs or whatever.
Yeah, so like, those can kind of stay. But there are the PG-13 movies where you're sitting there like, oh, okay, wow, this is a PG-13 movie.
Like, I would say this podcast is like a PG-13.
Yeah.
Like,
and then
we're gonna mention some stuff that like probably is above this, but like
I don't think kids are sitting through almost an hour and a half of us talking about film.
Yeah, like actually, we're gonna have an episode that's like about like really long and boring movies that no one's gonna talk about, but we'll figure that out.
But yeah, there's also R-rated movies that really don't need to be R-rated. But anyways. Yeah.
So
what is our next episode, Gavin?
So next episode we have so to get away from this topic, which is very like very like gory stuff, like very much like very hard to sit through sometimes. Let's go to something that I think everyone can enjoy, and that's the world of Mel Brooks. The guy who taught us that it was good to be the king. You know what I mean? So we're both pretty big fans of Mel Brooks, and definitely in the way that we view comedy, and oftentimes in some very ways that I feel like a lot of people don't really give him credit for, oftentimes filmmaking itself, in the way that people tribute cinema, in the way that oftentimes we're talking about a genre that's been butchered, not even horror. Let's talk about parody movies and how bad they are. But then you watch Mel Brooks movies, and then sometimes
Baseball is the GOAT. Young Frankenstein is one of my favorite movies of all time.
And we're going to talk about those, but we wanted to do it in a very interesting way. Because it would be interesting to rate our top 3 Mel Brookses, because I think we have some very different answers and what we would consider one of the best by one of the masters. Did you know he's like 98 or something?
He's still kicking around. I know he's producing. Kicking, man. He's still producing movies.
He's doing shows. Like no, he isn't doing movies anymore. He's doing he's producing. A TV show. But he won an Oscar recently. You see him up there, like Nathan Lane and Matthew Broderick give him like an honorary Oscar. He went up there. He's in good form. His brain is still moving fast. Great. He's got that quick wit. So next time in the podcast, we're gonna have a bit of a lighter topic, have a little more fun, talk about Mel. Anyway,
horror movies can be fun. No, that's just me.
Movies can't be fun. What are you talking about, Andrea? We got to talk about Bella Tarr. We got to talk about Andrzej Wajda. We got to talk about just really serious filmmakers.
Yes, we are in film school. We are hoity-toity
Right.
and not at
We
all.
got to talk about really obscure filmmakers like Quentin Tarantino. just obscure movies.
We have
Pulp Fiction.
Have you ever seen Interstellar? Have you ever seen it?
Have you ever seen Reservoir Dogs?
I don't think you are on the same caliber as me, and you have not seen 2001: A Space Odyssey. You didn't understand 2001: A Space Odyssey, okay?
Well, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna tell you about how I watched Bella Tarr Santiago. Right? I'm gonna tell you how I watched it. I didn't watch it. Anyway.
I lied about watching Citizen Kane when I first went to film school. No, I actually did watch it. But
I'm gonna be honest. Like, Citizen Kane looked pretty good, but not as good as my phone. Like, I was looking at Instagram and Citizen Kane was going on. I thought it was cool, but like, where's the color? Like, come on, let's talk about that. Where'd it go?
Where's the color? All right.
Where'd it go?
Well,
all right. So
see y'all next time. That's
right,
it for Some Like the Hot Takes.
Bye.
Bye.
That's me screaming. Yeah.